REST Perl and Perl6 and anybody speak Spanish around here? Bailador? Bailador. We'll get into that in a second. So anyway, REST. We've all heard it. It stands for representational state transfer. This was first described in Roy Thomas Fielding's PhD dissertation in 2000 called Architectural Styles and the Design of Network-Based Software Architectures. It sounds like a barn burner, and it kind of is. It was really interesting reading. I read much more of it than I thought I would. But the idea of the REST server, or what he was describing here, is basically kind of the in-between the actual web service or web server and the endpoint client. It was a way of them being able to make, requests and responses and do it in a predictable manner. Without going too crazy in-depth into it, his dissertation covered, well, a little bit more than this, but I only got down to code on demand. After that, I ran out of time in Steam. But basically, he talked about the need of client-server, basically the UI versus data storage. The server has the data, the client wants it, but the client doesn't want to figure out how the server is storing it. So you need that UI. It doesn't need to be graphical, of course, just an interface. It needs to be stateless. In other words, the server doesn't care what the state is. It is the client's responsibility to know the state, to know what's going on, to keep, that is its concern. Caching was the idea of it's a layered system. You are talking to a server somewhere else, doesn't matter where it is, but in between you and that server, you have another server, and it may cache some information. So then that way, you don't have to always go back to the original host, or you can even make that decision yourself. I have this piece of information. How good is it? He describes ways of allowing you to make that decision without always having to go back and say, get me the latest copy. Uniformed interface, and we're going to go much more into it, but the idea of it is implementations are decoupled from the service they provide. Meaning, you're a MySQL server, that's great. You have it in a binary file of some of your own choosing. That's great, but you all have to admit it in the same way. You have to provide it out. Code on demand, of course. I mean, that's the whole JavaScript. Why does the server need to do, the formatting so it looks good for you? You can offload that to the client computer, and the client can worry about that. There are actually I think at least one or two other points, but again, didn't get into those. But for the REST API, the one that really is interesting to us is the uniformed interface. It's basically the uniform interface exists on 4 constraints. The first one is identification of a resource. Every resource has a unique identifier that is the same to everybody. Everybody goes to this URL to see the users on this system. It's not that for me, it's one URL, and for someone else, it's a different URL. And if I want to share my information with you, well, then I first need to figure out, no, the identification for the resource is consistent to all. Manipulation of resource through representations. That basically means, how do you see it? How do you want to see it? Do you want to see it as JSON? Do you want to see it as XML? That is the responsibility of, I guess for lack of a better way of putting it, the presenting agent. It is a way of the client and the server to talk to each other, and one either indicates to the other, or one says to the other, I'd like it in this format. If you're the client, you ask. Or if you're the server, you're getting it in this format. But many systems have several different formats, and it needs to be format agnostic. Your information should be able to be presented through whatever needs to be done. Self-descriptive messaging. Basically, the message has everything that you need. Now, again, this is Fielding's dissertation. This is his ideology. We're going to get a little further into that soon. But basically, the message that you come back, it should be fully formed. It shouldn't be something where I'm looking at the employee record, but I have to make another call to get his last name or her last name. Hypermedia as the engine. This basically goes to that the HTTP protocol tells you what's going on. meaning there is meta information available, so you don't have to do some funky things. And we'll show some examples eventually that I've seen here at this company, I've seen out in the wild. It's great. So the first thing, I'm just going to really quickly talk about HATEOAS. HATEOAS. I call it HATEOAS because I've been part of an implementation of this, which I've been not a fan. It stands for Hypermedia as an Engine of Application State. Wikipedia describes it as a REST client needs little to no prior knowledge about how to interact with an application or the server beyond a generic understanding of hypermedia. Basically what it means is, as if you are HATEOAS compliant, you just need to know how to make an HTTP GET request, and the information you come back, you can look at that, you can parse through it, read it and understand it, and it will tell you what the next step is. You don't need to go to a manual, you just look at the response. It tells you everything about it. It sounds fantastic, doesn't it? It does until you see this. So this is, you're going to see this is what my server is going to be spitting out. This is the user information, just in regular JSON format. And even I don't really follow all my recommendations that you'll end up hearing. But basically, I have an ID, I have a name, a UUID for just a universal identifier. I concatenated it down to make it fit. So this is like your standard JSON request from a REST service. This is the response if it came from a HATEOAS compliant, or not even compliant because it's not even fully done. I didn't want to do it. But anyway, it basically says, here is the entire response. Here are the attributes of the user you're looking for. It has a field, the name of this field is name. The description of it is user's name. Label is username. If you want to display it in a GUI, you want to know what username is. The type is a string. That's good to know. And the value is Erik. So basically what gets communicated right there, I mean, yeah, you don't know that it has to be a string. I mean, like this is an integer. Actually, it's a Boolean. But, is that important for you to know? Well, it's active. You can guess at it. But no, here, it tells you that. It's of type Boolean. The default value is of 1. If you're going to create a record, you have to know what the default might be so you can display it properly. The value is 1 for the attribute active, and so forth and so forth. Now, this is great. It's very descriptive. If I'm pulling back 1,000 records of users, this is going to get very old. I really don't need this information over and over and over again. The actual part that I do find useful is it has a links area. It basically says that this user has a relationship to boards, so you can find this user's boards at this URL. Actually, it would have the full URL there, not just the path. But this would be nice, because now you can look at this and say, oh, if I call this endpoint, then I'm going to see what boards are associated with it. I guess on a quick aside, should have probably explained that up front. We use a product called Idea boards every now and then for retros, and it's basically you put up a board with certain categories, and anybody can put a card on that board. It's trying to think of an alternative, so I wrote this as a kind of a beginning of a RESTful interface to an idea board type service. So you have users, and this is user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and these are all the boards that user has created. So anyway, you're going to see this user and boards thing over and over again, but the idea is it's just you see the relationship. So just to give you an idea, I was in actually the last 2 years part of a group that created a HATEOAS compliant application. And it spits out every time you send information, or every time you ask it for information, it spits out all that about the records that you want. And so I've borrowed a log. This is a log of half a day. The log is 1,954 lines. Anyone want to guess how large that file is? Couple K. Any other guesses? This is a HATEOAS compliant UI. It is logging its requests, the requests to it, and its responses. 1,945. We have a couple K. Do I have anything more? Couple meg. Anything else? That file is 26 megs of text. And do you want to see what's worse? Those are truncated responses. Hold on, let me bring that up a little higher. The message ends there. It's not, it can't even, well, it could, but it's not enough useful information. You get the same information over and over and over again. And the funniest thing is we built this system, and then we had a security audit. And the first thing they said to us, well, you can't use that. You cannot generate a UI off of information you got from a service. That's a security problem. What happens if someone injects something into that and all of a sudden you're displaying something you shouldn't be? You don't want to basically an automatic UI is a very potential security threat. And yeah, I mean, if whoever wrote the service to take this in, didn't account for injection attacks or JavaScript or cross-site services attacks. The problem would be is all of a sudden you're taking that in, you're generating UI, and voila, you've popped up. You get a pop-up, or you're downloading something onto their site. This is any security person will say this is a bad idea. So anyway, I'm going to shut up about that because it was a bad experience in my life. About the URIs, we see a couple like here, and you see these all over, and sometimes you'll see parameters passed to them. And it seems rather daunting. At least I always thought is like, well, should it be plural? Should it not be plural? Should this be in a parameterized list? Should I be sending this in the body or not? And I've discovered that actually really Fielding's dissertation has 4 objects. We really need to only focus on 2, is the document resource. That is basically the singular concept, the object itself. It's like the endpoint of users of this ID. This is this user. It will return that user. If we want that user's board number 5, we just do that. Or if we just want boards number 5, the 5th board, or the boards with ID of 5, we just call that. That's a single instance. The second concept is just the collection. These are collection of objects, users, boards, thoughts, whatever. So this is all that you have to keep in mind. And then just a few simple rules. Some are, I would say, actually none of these are required, by the way. None of these rules are required. That's the fun part. Some rules are more important than others. These are rules that I say you follow. Always use nouns, never use verbs. Use the HTTP protocol or method of delete on a user. Never say get, delete user number, then the ID number. I tried so hard to find this, and I know that I read this. I think we read this in Irresistible API, but Flickr, no, not Flickr. The Flickr. Flickr. They created an API for their for their pictures. That's not Flickr, is it? Okay. And they did that. They had an endpoint that was accessible via Git. It was called delete photo, and you gave it an idea. And so the bot hit it. It figured out all the picture ID numbers, and then it started hitting that endpoint to try to see what happens. And so it deleted half of their archive before they knew what hit them. Some rules you just don't break. The first one is nouns, not verbs. In the URI, these are nouns. These are objects or collections. They aren't actions. Mind you, there is an asterisk. There are things called controllers. I'm not going to get into here, but that can be a verb, but it would happen with a post, and it happens at the end. It does. That we're not going to cover. Anyway, the main methods that you really want to know about are get. The thing to know about, the rule to know about get is it must not have side effects. Get returns only. It doesn't do something and return. It doesn't calculate something and returns. It only returns. Post, basically add data to a collection. Put, update a resource. Unfortunately, put, it means you update the entire resource. Doesn't mean if you have a user and you need a new email address, you can't just put the email address. You put the entire object back. The idea is you replace it. Delete, obviously it deletes. Head, if you basically want just the header information of any of these, usually it's going to be the get to figure out, do I need to get this again? It might, is it stale? Have things changed? Then you put a head call, and all you do is get the header, no body. Lighter weight call. Options, great if it's implemented. It basically says, oh, what are the options for the user's endpoint? And it'll tell you, oh, you can get this, you can add, you can get, post, up, so forth. Sorry. So the big question is, well, what about patch? I've heard so much about patch. And patch, the idea is you only need to update the parts that you want, right? Well, a fantastic article also on the resource page is called Please Don't Patch Like an Idiot. And the author apologizes. I guess the word idiot in French is not as harsh. But he basically concludes his article by saying, now please, either don't use patch method or use it the right way. Patch, according to the RFC 5789, is patch requests that a set of changes described in the request's entity be applied to the resource identified in the requesting URI. That doesn't mean that I'm going to patch to my user a new email address by saying email address. You are going to send it a set of instructions that somehow describes to it that says, on this object, to the email ID, I want you to delete or update this information. It's, again, it's much more complicated. And the sad part is, I mean, patch has been around since 2011, and 2014 it got, a little bit updated with an actual language of how to communicate this information. A lot of things do not implement it. We, again, our service, we had patch, we were ready to use it. We were going through a proxy layer. Proxy layer would not proxy a patch, so we had to overwrite the put. So, again, you can look at patch, but if you're going to do patch, you either need to be using the newest of everything, or you're going it on your own, or just be careful. So anyway, rules with a question mark. These become more suggestive. These just started to become, as I've been researching, best practices almost. Nouns should be plural. Everything is a collection. It's basically you have a collection and then you have a document. Your collection is users. To get a single user, you give it an ID. That gives you the user object. But when you're calling the user's endpoint, you are expecting a collection. Even if the collection only has one, it's a collection. It could be more. Highly recommended to use hyphens instead of underscores, primarily because URLs or links are underlined by most browsers. If you're using underscores, they may get swallowed up and you may not see them. So they've been using hyphens. Lowercase. Yes, true that files are case sensitive, but the RFC 3986 basically says that the host name needs to be lowercase. So it's just easier to keep the entire thing lowercase. Don't mix your cases, not in the endpoints. Use headers, and I've seen this all the time. Basically, we have a health check, that's great. Then we put in .json. Now we're getting the response back in JSON format. That's the wrong way to do it. There's an HTTP header for that. It's called the accept header. You tell it what you want to accept, and it will. You don't provide it, you get it in your default format. You provide application JSON, you get JSON back if it supports it. Again, documentation. Pagination. This is important to consider because at the very beginning, if you're just going to say, oh, I have these collections and I can call the endpoint and you get everything back, well, that's great if you have 5 users. But if you call the user's endpoint and you have 1,000 users, that starts becoming a big load. So the idea is you want to start out with pagination. And even though you might not think you need it, always start with it documented as part of it. Primarily because I worked for a company where we decided, well, this is crazy. We have users calling us and downloading 10,000 records on one go. We need to paginate this. So we added pagination. You know what kind of a bug nightmare that was? All of a sudden, UIs wouldn't work because the item that you needed was, on the second page, which, before, because it had 23 items and pagination was all of a sudden enforced to 20 items, that item was no longer returned right away because the software didn't go back to say, oh, were there more? And there are definitely many ways of attacking that, but make that consideration early. If you do decide to add pagination, make it a breaking version change. Which actually, I should have moved this part up. Versioning. Use versions. Again, this goes against Fielding's wishes. He thinks that a version in the URL is a big middle finger to a true RESTful service, because it means that the RESTful service can't, evolve on its own. You're forcing it into this version 1, version 2. Trust me, your clients will love you for it. No client wants to have to build an interface that has to auto-discover new features, or even worse, it's relying on a feature that all of a sudden disappears, and they didn't write their client to be able to handle that. Versions takes that all out of that being an issue for you. Pardon me. Query parameters. Anything query parameters, basically after the question mark, it's basically for filtering a collection. It's not about identifying an object. So yes, you want all your users that are not active. That's great, because you're going to take a big collection, make a smaller subset of it. Where UUID equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're trying to get back a singular entity. That's a bad use of it. It probably is supported, but it's not the best use of it. Health check. It's just a sanity check. Put one in there. If all of a sudden your application stops working, hit the health check. No, it did your database disappear. That actually happened several times while I was writing this. I'd come back and all of a sudden nothing worked anymore. I would change my code and it turned out that I lost my database connection because I have a very immature database connection strategy. So the idea is, enveloping. This comes from an article by Peter Boyer. It's called RESTful API Design Experience. And I always thought this was a stupid idea. You make a call, to get this user's information, and then you get back this nice little package which has the data. It's like, okay, now I have to just go through an entire layer to get to this. It'd be so much easier just to get my object, wouldn't it? He argues saying that this way, you never have to worry about getting an empty response. You give it a bad user ID, well, then all of a sudden you get an empty response altogether. So by having at least a data envelope, well, then you know that you can depend that data is there, and if data is empty, you can act accordingly. What's better also is it gives you an entire namespace, if you can call it, for error messaging. You can put all your errors into here and not worry about it colliding potentially with information that is in your data. Let's say you have an error code. Well, you just happen to have a code here, and which one would survive if you didn't envelope it. So even though I still kind of shudder when I look at this, like, oh, now I just have to get through another layer to get at it. It does seem like a great idea to take on the burden of creating this layered system. My data will be here, error information is here. Look at one or the other to figure out what's happening. Okay, HTTP headers, really the only ones you kind of have to worry about. Content type. So this is what these are what the server sends out. This basically content type is in the format of type, subtype, so it's basically text, HTML. HTML is a type of text. I never understood why they said JSON is a type of application, but they decided it. The very beginning it was text JSON, but they've changed it now. These are all for the caching. E-tags is basically like Java's gethash or hash code method. It is basically a string representation of what the state is of your object. So basically, think of it this way: you do a call to a RESTful service, you pull in its e-tag, if it provides one, you pull it in, and then if like 5 minutes later you're like, oh, I want to make sure, am I still up to date? You can just do a head call, get the e-tags, compare them, and then know whether you're in sync or out of sync with the server. Last modified and expires is more for the server to be able to tell the client when things were modified, but even more importantly, when it expects things to expire. If the server says, well, I'm setting this flag, I will never change this flag, so it sets an expire date to next year, and you're 5 minutes later, there's no reason for you to go and check this again. So again, these both are date times. This is more of just a hash string. What the client can send to the server is the accept. Basically, if the client wants JSON, it will say accept application JSON or accept application XML. So that is how you communicate for that type of information. And of course, response codes. You probably have all seen these. These are the 10 most popular plus one of my favorites. Anyone want to guess which one's my favorite? I'm a teapot, you're right. It's the HTTP coffee protocol. April Fool's joke, sorry. So, okay, Perl6 and what we're actually here for, Perl6, right? And Bailador. Basically, it's a lightweight, route-based web application framework for Perl6. Don't worry, I'll actually show you code. Again, Spanish for dancer. This is because it was based off of the Perl5 dancer framework. I read somewhere, and then I couldn't find it anymore, that it actually started in 2011. And it became, I believe, its own repo in Git about 2015, 2016. So It's actually rather simple. Once you've installed it, actually, you really don't even need to start your own project. It's just using it to start your own to start your project. It's much easier. It gives you kind of a skeleton framework. You do Bailador, new, and then your project name. Again, using dashes instead of underscores because of the rule that we talked about. These two B's, please, that was autocorrect, and I did not catch that. I apologize. Once you have your project, you basically, it creates a directory called project name. You CD into that, and then you can just start your project running with Bailador easy, and then your the app that it creates for you. If you're debugging it, use watch, and it will actually, as things get updated. And this is actually, it does it in a really smart way. It doesn't refresh itself as you're saving the file. Is when it gets a request, it looks to see have the files been updated, and then it reloads those files. The only time it really kills you is if you try to hit your web service in the middle of creating like a syntax error. Then things get a little wonky off the stop and restart it sometimes. But really, I mean, that's all you need to know about it. The rest is just Perl. So really shortly, I will pause here. Again, the Git repo, this is really the only thing you're going to need, I would think, because the README file has all of these and more resources that I used for this talk. It also has the Docker file that we're about to look, so you can kind of look at it. The one thing I would do want to point out, because I kept finding them and forgetting about them and finding them again and being happy, is in the repo for the Bailador, the docs directory, they have a README which has significant information but not a lot. The doc directory has what you're looking for. And the examples directory fills in kind of what the doc directory doesn't do. Again, it's on the README for this repo. But I just wanted to point that out because over the last month it's been sad how many times I found it, lost it, and had to re-find it. So let's take a look at some actual code and execute some things. So these are my Docker containers. I have basically a log file that I'm logging stuff to, and then just the command line. But let's actually look at the code. Here we go. So basically, how do I get the projects file back? The command one? Thank you. Okay, sorry. So I created a directory called Perl6 rest. Of course, in there, well, this is all my Docker stuff. Inside the code directory is where I ran the Bailador command. And it created a bin directory with the app.pl. This is the file that you see. A test directory, so it automatically you can test your own thing in a programmatic way. In your views, these are your templates, which I'm just going to give actually the boilerplate. It comes this way. And then settings, don't really have to worry about that. These are other files that I've added lately, but this is the meat and the cheese of the whole thing. This is what's being executed. It's I did uselib/code because in my Docker container I put everything in a /code directory. And as you see, I've tried to start adding some modules to use to try to make this a little nicer. Didn't work out for me, so it's all kind of vomited in here. So that'll make for a better presentation, I think. Basically, you use Bailador, and I use DBI-ish for the DBI connection, and JSON fast for the encoding and decoding of inputs. The version file, this is only for the home page. You'll see that in a minute. This is my log file. And here, this is the DBI connection. It's, again, as I said, it's not a smart connection. If it goes away, it goes away. There's no recovery. Again, when I get my DBI file up, it'll have a get DBH, which will try to do some recovery if the connection gets. It'll check for a connection. If it gets lost, it'll reconnect. But right now, I mean, this is all that it is. And mind you, again, out of the box, if you follow the README, all of this is set up and will work. It just won't have the data that I currently am going to show you. Okay, and here, this is app config default content type. Basically, I'm telling it I'm going to spit out application JSON. Just makes it easier. That way I don't have to repost it every time. And so just for the, at first what I said, I wanted to show you the templating. So if you hit just the root directory, I have to override the default content type because this is going to be an actual web page. So it's a text HTML, and just to make sure that I'm hitting it, I'm actually re-hitting it instead of just hitting the same static thing, I added a random number in here, and then I print that out to the log. And then really, this is all it is: template, index.html, and this is the stuff that you put into index.html. It's basically, it's using Perl6's template toolkit, basically. So it takes what it finds, in this file. Whoops. And it just, all it does is print out Bailador app and the version number, which is going to be very interesting because I tack on a random number. So basically, every time I hit it, and let's make that more interesting. So, it gets logged, the random number gets logged, and then, it prints it out to the screen. So that's it. Oh, well, I guess I didn't show you the magic that does make all this happen. At the very bottom of this, you tell it to baile, meaning to dance. And actually, when you start and stop this guy, it's actually kind of cute. In true Perl fashion, attempting to boot up the app, entering the dance floor. It's telling you, I am now listening on, and this all comes out of my configuration. I just chose at random the 3123. So again, it's this which starts the daemon with it listening, and it enters all these these listening points. So really, this is kind of the meat and the potato. You give it the method, the endpoint, and then you give it a subroutine. So, like for getting all users, it's just you hit the /users directory. It basically does a select star from user, and it spits that out. It just, it selects all rows, it wants an array of hashes, and then it turns them to JSON. So for that, we're actually going to need Postman. So, health check. Well, we'll get there in a second. So this is, that's hitting a specific. So just hitting the users, doing a get. And here are the users. Notice I have 2 of them. Now, mind you, because I just did a straight pull out, DBI-ish takes varchars and sees them as an array of bytes. And that's what it's, it's saying my password is PASS. It's password. So obviously, need to do some massaging there that I can't just dump out what I get from MySQL. It's not that easy yet. But, I just need to create a method that takes over that. But that's basically it. And so as we see here, for this user, something at there.com, we have a UUID, and we can just tack that on to the end of users, send that, and we only get the one response. And if you notice, the status is 200 OK. So that's what I'm expecting. Why the number one, a couple of things wrong here. I show the ID here, and I use a UUID up there instead of that. UUIDs are universal unique identifiers. And the reason why you want to do that is you never want to kind of show someone that, oh, this is ID 2, and this is ID 3, and then they're going to think, oh, well, what happens if I just hand jam ID 4 in there? Do I even own ID 4? I don't know, but I can try. If you use UUIDs, there's really no way of guessing at identifier. Again, you never want to use a UUID as a unique identifier in a database because that is a varchar, and a varchar doesn't index. So if you have, this is your UUID for your user, and then you have your UUID for your board, and then you want to find all of your boards for all your users, so you do select user.uuid from boards.uuid. That's going to take forever. That's only if you have like 6 things in there because it's trying to do a string match on every one. So for internally for the database, you still want to keep an integer ID, but for external representation, you want to use this UUID. And I guess I took that out because I felt that I was going to run out of, I am running out of time, but I'm going to show you anyway. In MySQL, which actually, when you install MySQL on this image, it's actually maria.db, but use Oh no, I can show you here. Sorry. So MySQL has a neat trick for the UUIDs. You don't actually need to generate them, but I'll show you that in a second. So the get user with a UUID, that's basically right here. So I do a get users colon UUID in Perl6. When you do a colon and a name, that becomes a named parameter. So it instantiates a variable called UUID, and it just passes it to this subroutine. And then that basically says, looking up this, here's my query, I execute it. If I have one row, then I get that as a hash form and I return it. If I don't have it, I return a 404. And so let's say if we muck this up, sure enough, nothing gets returned and I get a 404. So the thing to remember with Bailador and with Perl, Bailador, it will return the last thing evaluated. So if I didn't have this return here, it would actually literally return on this screen, you would see a 404 here. So if you're going to not return a body, you need to explicitly not return anything. But with the status of 404, I have got the right information that, hey, I looked this up, but I did not find it. I don't need a message in here saying I didn't find it. I just didn't find it. It's yes or no. There's no more information needed. Health check. So I guess I should show you my health check. Here's my health check. Comes back, okay. I really like this a little bit overly verbose. I'm beginning to wonder about this URI thing, but as far as internally, this is kind of really important because number one, it tells you the overall status is okay, and for this individual response, I'm looking at my MySQL, and the methodology is seeing if I'm able to execute a query on it. Internally, if I knew that this was safe, I might even put the connection protocol here for that. But if all of a sudden this stops working, I can hit this and it will tell me whether it's working or not. And this is basically the code. It's I'm back to I didn't need this because I've set I set the overall. I created a default up here, but obviously that slipped my mind. I figured that out after I wrote this, and this is basically it. I just do a select one. If it is successful, if basically I have one connection, in other words, I get back a number one, then everything's okay. Else, I stick with my, I just made that. Yeah, I need to fix this. Whoops. Then it, it'll change the description of this. Oh, no, okay, I'm sorry. If it doesn't, I'm sorry, it keeps the status as failure, and this is it basically goes over the array of my results, looking to see if any of them are failure, then it sets the overall to failure. So that's how it works. But then it's basically, I've created a hash object that kind of looks the way that I want it to. I just turned it into JSON, and I spit it out. Although I probably should do something with response codes here to indicate maybe degraded as well. Right now, you would have to actually parse this to understand what I'm actually talking. Because even if MySQL if MySQL went away, then I would still get service. There we go. Please work. Please. Okay, internal server error. Okay, maybe I need to. Oh, because I'm not actually catching that, so that is being surfaced back out. So I have some things to work on. But that's basically it. I mean, this is kind of the meat and the potatoes. It's, it's basically you set your endpoint. If endpoints can do multiple things, like you're also going to support post, you literally just do post, get. Would it be post, get? No, this would be put and get. Sorry, put, because put will be the updating, because we have a post up here. And here you have an example of this is how I insert. So into the user table, into the user field, I simply insert the UUID function. That generates a UUID for me. I should. So hopefully this works. I had a problem with it earlier. To create a user, there we go. I'm going to do a post into the user's endpoint with all the required information. well, this should fail. Sorry, what? Yeah, exactly. But let's see if it fails. 500 internal server error. Okay, how about we just start everything over? Okay. Because this should actually, if it already found it, it should return back use of results via any string in the context. Okay. And I lost my mouse. And my laptop's frozen. Believe it or not, this actually works. When I create one, it responds with a 203. Oh, thank you. So let's try this, Derek. Okay, 201 created. And this location should actually have your UUID in it. When you create something, one of the HTML, HTTP headers should be the location of the newly created object, so that the receiving client can go and get it. So basically now if we...
Was there anything in the body of that, or is it just a...
No, it's an empty. There's nothing to... I mean, you would...
The actual UUID of the new user just gives you...
Well, it should...
that you could go to users.
Well, no, the code should work. That should say /users and then your UUID. I obviously have another bug in there. It was working this morning. So anyway, any questions or thoughts?
What is Postman actually?
Oh, it's just a REST client. It used to be free. I don't know if it's still free. I paid like $20 for it. No, or maybe $10 for it, because it has you can create all of these. You can record things, and then you can. Let's put it this way: you can do things that are far beyond what I've ever used it for. But you can create these environments, and you can create global environments, so that if you have like one of the things that we do is we have a unique identifier that connects a session together, and if you're making call after call, you can just put in there curly bracket ID, or like session ID curly bracket, and then you have a global variable for that, and it just replaces it whenever. So it makes testing a lot really cool. But Firefox, they have a built-in REST client. I think it's just called Advanced REST Client for Firefox. Yeah, it's a plugin. This is a standalone. It used to be a Chrome plugin. Now it's a standalone program. I really like it. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I mean, the big thing is that here you can, you have a drop down for everything that you want. Whatever you use this for, you really could just use curl for. This is just a pretty UI for it. Yeah, very powerful, yes. You can do cookies, you can do secure sessions with it. It's definitely a tool I would, if you're doing a lot of hitting a RESTful clients, RESTful services, you would be well worth to spend the money on the program. It just puts things together rather nicely. Anything else?
What was your favorite part about writing Perl6 these days?
Being confused by hashes.
No,
favorite.
like about writing Perl6.
I've been running Perl 5 for so long that I'm still trying to warm up to Perl 6. I do actually. I take it back. Where is it? The for loop, the arrow notation of the for loop. That's pretty slick. It makes it a lot. Do I not have it here? Okay, I had it here. Oh, it's in the... Yeah. Yeah, I really kind of like this notation than what it was before. It's kind of neat. Yeah, you don't have to worry about the whole sigil things. Like basically, instead of having to do $status, I found this notation really weird and wonky to begin with, but I kind of like it now. I like it now only in that it's fairly clear. You can, basically these are synonymous. So instead of having to remember that, in Perl 5 you can do that, And because it's in curly brackets, the string is still treated like a string, like a quoted string. This is, you either have this version of it or you have to quote it yourself. The dot syntax, I like that better than the arrows. Although, honestly, it took me so long to, most of my problems when I was just writing, mindlessly, I'd end up getting those. But yeah, so I guess those are the things that I'm enjoying about it. You had a question?
Oh yeah, what's that the status? Is that the function or something?
A status or?
Yeah, the status for what's the?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. So this is the HTTP response code or the status. So basically, oh yeah, it's setting. So this is telling Bailador that the response code or the status of this request is now 404. It's basically, yeah, it's a function. So I mean, Perl 6 is very parentheses light. Like if you notice, like my if command, no parentheses. In fact, most parentheses in Perl 6 are gone. So
Optional or gone?
optional, but like you could never write an if statement like this. It's not like in Perl 5 you could write a status like this, or you could, well, you wouldn't be able to pass anything. So if this were, oh no, you'd have to do it that way. Yeah, so actually you'd still have to do it this way. And in Perl 6 you can just, yeah. So yeah, that is a function call to Bailador's status method that it has exported. Perl 6 does a lot of exporting of methods. So yeah, this gets exported.
Some global variable somewhere, right?
No, it's updating the HTTP response code for this one interaction, this one session. So basically, the next time, so you're when you hit /users with a user ID, then if you don't find it, it'll set it to 404. But the minute that it responds to that, it clears it out. It doesn't remember this. So it's not like if you were to hit it again and have a successful response or a response where status isn't set, it's not like all of a sudden you would still see status 404. It will be back to status 200. It either sets it every time, or this is a one-time. It's not like a global ever existing ID. Yeah. Yeah. It's just per session. Yeah. Anything else? It was really nice how fast I was able to just get this up and going. I had at first I did have some weirdness on getting these things to figure out how to pass it a variable, but once that was up and running, I mean, it was fairly simple. And then so basically on the create, so here post to users, you can basically Bailador makes available the request object, which has the entire request. You basically just get the body, you parse it because you're expecting JSON, and then you can just, obviously, again, this is a very lightweight, not a lot of checking. It just assumes everything's there, and then that MySQL will do the rest. But I mean, yeah, so basically, this parameter, does it exist? Oh, good. If it exists, then eventually we'll just pass that in. So it's really easy to get up and running really fast. And again, like I said, did I just close it? Yeah, for whatever reason that locks up my computer. That's all available on my GitHub. I mean, this entire presentation, you can download it, run the Docker, follow the commands in the README, and then you can, hit it yourself and it's, play around with it. So thank you very much for coming out tonight, and we'll see you in a couple months. Thank you. Oh.